All right, let's turn right away to Philip Stewart. He is live. He's in Seat Pleasant, where they're also dealing with the same mess a lot of us are. And let's get right to him. Philip, what are you seeing your way?
Hey there, I'll step out of the way here and show you. Take a look behind me. You can see this big tree back here into this house. We're on Gregg Street. A couple of the people inside overnight, about 7 of them, about half were sleeping, half of them were awake. They say about midnight they heard this loud crash. That's when this tree came down. They came outside and finally were able to take a look at this. They've been up, as you can imagine, since then. No one went back to bed. They told us that the fire company came out here, cut off the power box there that you can see and taped that off across the front of the yard there. But you know what's concerning about this is that tree is still leaning on those wires up there, and you can see on your screen there it's leaning to the left. That is also generally the direction that the wind is blowing right now. So, you know, some of these homeowners here have real concerns that since this is only really halfway down, they're concerned that it could come down even further. So they're obviously waiting for power crews and some people to come out here to try to help them out. I want to show you one other thing over here that we noticed, and that's down here. We have not moved this since we got here because I want to show you where this blew from. We got this shutter that came off of a house. It matches the shutters on this house over here. There's a white house down here right next door here, a white and brick house you can see. So at some point over the course of the evening, this blew away. We also want to tell you a little bit about the drive out here. You know, we've been asking some people, you know, what have the roads been like? What kind of damage are you seeing? It hasn't been too bad, but perfect example of why you need to use caution here this morning. My photographer, Dale Wright, is driving, coming up Kenilworth Avenue. We're in the right-hand lane, came around a bend, and there was just a huge pool of standing water. It had been taped off sort of with some cones, so we had some time to see it, but it was dark. That portion of roadway didn't have many lights, and that was the perfect example of why when you're out, even though it's getting light today, you might be coming around a bend, you might be coming around somewhere where you can't see that far in front of you, and you come up on standing water, and it was something that we could not have safely driven through. Luckily, we were able to deal with that. But again, live look here at this house. This is just one example. We've seen a couple of trees down out here. We understand at last check about 2,000 people in this immediate community, specifically in this zip code portion of Seat Pleasant, without power right now. Obviously, this will be one of many areas today where crews are going to be out having to make some repairs. Sine, Scott?
All right, thank you, Philip. And he brings up a great point. Phil, you were talking about seeing that water on the ground. We were on a conference call on Friday with the head of FEMA as well as Secretary Napolitano, who the phrase was something very similar to water on the ground, turn around, because they said you just don't know how deep that water is and you don't know what's under it. And I think people see 6 inches, they think that's easy for me to get through, and that's not always the case. So people do need to be careful, and that's some great advice, Phil. We appreciate that. Good example of what you're dealing with out there. Thank you.
All right, great job, Philip. We appreciate it.
And we know that there's some work to be done in Seat Pleasant, Maryland. That's where Philip Stewart joins us now live from. And Phil, you had a similar situation, it looked like, behind you earlier.
That's right, exactly, and we'll show you that in just a second, but I want to sort of take you down the street here. We're on Gregg Street. If you look down there, you'll see behind that chain link fence down there, there's one tree that happens to be down there. We knocked on that door. The house is actually vacant, so we are sort of assuming that it came down from this storm, which is probably a safe assumption at this point. I also want to show you, you know, most of what we're seeing is stuff like this. If you look down here on the ground, this kind of maybe about this size. This is some of the bigger stuff that we're seeing. A lot of it is just, you know, small chunks of trees. That's not the case over here, though. Follow me over here. We'll show you what has happened at this house at 6605. Take a look at the size of the tree that came down here. The people who live here told me they were inside. About half of them were asleep. The other half say they couldn't go to sleep last night. They were watching TV. About midnight, they still had power at this point. The tree came down. See, here you go. We got some neighbors here taking a look. People starting to make their way outside. But they say the tree came down about midnight, and that was it for the power. And as far as we can tell, most of this block is without power. And you know, the concern right now is that this tree is still sort of teetering on these wires here. They're hopeful that there's sort of enough of it still stuck in the ground there that it's not going to move any further. The fire department came out here not long after it fell. They disconnected the power box over there and put that tape across. But a big chunk of the tree also fell down into the backyard. We spoke with the people who live here just a short time ago just to hear what they said it sounded like when this all happened.
My nephews, they come up and tell me that something is smashed onto the house, and we look out here and it's this tree smashed onto the house.
We couldn't go to sleep, and the power had just came back on, and like 5 minutes later the tree fell in the house and knocked the power back out.
Now, the first gentleman you heard there from, Mike Johnson, he says he's been renting here about 5 years. His 6-year-old son was also in the house. They called some family members to come take the son away. He slept through most of it. They said they didn't want him to see this. He said, you know, it's been much of like what Suzanne and you guys have been talking about. It's been such a crazy week. They didn't want him to know any part of this. So they're obviously going to have some cleanup here to do. They're waiting on the power company to come out here and try to help them out with this tree. One other note before we go back. Remember the shutter I showed you about a half hour ago? Got some good news. The people in the house over here came and claimed their shutter. So the cleanup has already started here in Seat Pleasant. At least we're starting with just a shutter. But hey, that's one thing less to clean up here this morning, guys.
Look at you reuniting people with their property, Phil.
Exactly.
Always good
Doing what I
Samaritan.
can.
That is
I'm
7
doing
on
what I
your
can.
side right there,
That's
Philip.
right.
We appreciate
Hey, what
it.
about power, though, Phil? Are you seeing, or does anyone in your area have power?
You know, this specific section of Seat Pleasant, we understand there are about 2,000 people without power at this point. Of course, it's much widespread, much more widespread throughout Prince George's County. And we're anticipating that now that the sun is up, now that people are getting an idea of the damage, and now that they're able to make some of the phone calls to report the damage, we'll start seeing some more crews out. But in this immediate neighborhood, just about everything on this side of the street is out. When we were coming in after we got off of 295 Kenilworth Avenue, it was spotty. There were some places where some of the street lights were on. There were other places where they were out. And then there were some places where, you know, it was very scattered. But as far as we know, in this location, about 2,000 people still without power at this point. And the winds are still whipping around quite a bit out here. The rain has come down a bit. So the concern is, you know, if more trees come down, that's obviously going to do some bad things to the number of people who are in the dark already.
Exactly, and we got to keep emphasizing, Phil, that it's a multi-day event restoring this power. We keep hearing that from Pepco and some of the other utilities that it's going to take a little while for them just to assess how bad this is, and then it's going to take them several days to get the power restored. So, unfortunately, everyone's really going to have to just hunker down and be as patient as possible.
Yeah, and I think nothing paints a picture more of that than just taking a look at all the images from all over the region, the eastern seaboard entirely affected by this.
I want to turn now to Philip Stewart. You know, we just heard from Eddie how people are coming together and really trying to work together as a community in the midst of the power outages, the damage, the devastation. And Philip, I know you've been seeing that out where you are. A lot of structural damage, property damage, but people trying to work together to get through it.
Well, I'll tell you what, you want to talk about coming together. You've given me the perfect segue, and you guys didn't even know that I was about to tell you about this. This is Andrea. We've been telling you about this house where the tree came down. Andrea works at PG Hospital. You just came by and gave them some money. You do not know these people. What tell me, how'd you hear about it and why'd you stop by?
I was on my way for leaving work, and I happened to hear it on the radio station, so I suggested I just go ahead and spread God's love and go ahead and spread God's love by helping out and hopefully financially be able to help the family out.
And you don't know them?
No,
They're
I
no
don't.
family members?
No, I don't.
I mean, what could this is, you know, they're talking back at the station about people coming together and helping out. Is it, you know, this kind of thing that brings people together?
Exactly. I think so. I think so.
And you were how was it at the hospital last night? While we have you here, we'll ask you about that too.
Oh, it was fine. Everything was fine. No problems.
Yeah. And you're on your way home now.
Yes, I am.
All right, we'll let you get dry and go ahead and get off there. Thank you so much,
All right,
Andrea.
thank you.
Great. See, this is what we're talking about here. We'll bring you up to speed on what we were talking about before if you are just joining us. Andrea heard about this house back here where this large tree has come crashing into the house. You see it's up on top of the roof there. The family that lives there, they have gone back inside right now. And, you know, there have been a couple of different neighbors who've come out and stopped by and been talking to the people. And, you know, this is sort of, we've been talking about how people are waking up, coming out to assess the damage. And in this case, they're also coming out to help their neighbors. I want to give you a quick update. Scott and Sinead, you guys were asking me about the power a little bit earlier. One of the neighbors who came by, she actually just lives right down the street, right around the corner here. She says they do have power, so it's very spotty in this neighborhood. And behind the camera, behind where Dale is, there's a whole housing complex here. They're fine. They have power. Now, it's gone off and on throughout the evening, and that was also the case with the woman that we spoke with down here. But a big chunk has power, but the whole way up this block, they're still without power. And, you know, that's one of the things that also adds to the difficulty of when crews get these reports is, you know, you have one side of the street that might be fine, but then they're getting reports that the other side of the street is isn't fine. So then they have to track down to where, you know, that traces back to. So that's the very latest from here. Talk about a great story. Neighbors truly helping neighbors with Andrea here. Doesn't live here, doesn't know them. On her way home from the hospital, heard about it and wanted to, you know, do what she could for this family that's been affected here. Great story.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, Phil, we've seen a lot of that even in the days leading up to this storm. We know the American Red Cross had been asking people, even in West Virginia, to start giving blood ahead of time because they wanted to make sure that that everyone was looking out for the other. And it's been successful. And, you know, living in Florida all those years and covering hurricanes. And then you'd come home after covering a shift, like Suzanne was talking about, and you'd find a tree. And so, you know, the neighbors would come over, you'd get out the chainsaw, you'd all take turns until you got tired and get some work done before you'd head back to work. But it is important that at times like this, everyone helps out, just like with the snowstorm and shoveling a neighbor's driveway.
Yep.
If you can help out someone, if you've got someone near you who's elderly, who's got disability, whatever it may be, if you can get over there and help them, that's a great idea.
Let's get over to Philip Stewart. He's been out looking at some of the damage that's been sustained in different parts of the metro right now in St. Pleasant, Maryland. Philip, how are things looking?
Well, you know, you guys are talking about the power outages. We know that at least about 2,000 people without power are right here immediately in this community where we are in St. Pleasant. And one of those homes is right back here behind me. Take a look. You'll see where this huge tree came down. The family that lives in there telling us this happened sometime around midnight. The power had been kind of going off and coming back on, and they said it just came back on, and they were sort of plugging their phones back in, turning the TV back on, and that's when they heard this crash. You can see the power box down there has been disconnected. The fire department came out here earlier this morning and did that. The good news to report here, though, is no one was injured when that tree came down. But boy, there are a lot of branches, not only out here in the front, but especially in the back of the house back there. And, you know, we're starting to see, as you would expect, it's getting light out now. We're into the morning hours, and people are sort of coming out and surveying the damage. So we've had a number of people come by taking a look. And you'll remember that last hit, we actually had some woman who doesn't even know the family, heard about this, came by and gave the family who lives here some money. One of those examples of people helping out whenever there's someone in need. But the power here, for the most part, has been kind of spotty. I was telling you, you know, this whole block has no power. Immediately behind us, they have some power, and we're hearing it's a little bit mixed down the street. One neighbor, though, that we met was Lenore. She's staying right here across the street, and for her, when she came out here this morning and took a look across the street, it certainly struck a nerve with her. She lives in Upper Marlboro. She was staying with her daughter here because she has a lot of big trees around her house that she's concerned about. She's been trying to call neighbors on landline phones, and they're not working, so she's a little concerned about what she's going to come home to. We'll let you listen to her first, then we have a second neighbor who's explaining how the power was throughout the evening. Let's take a listen to both of them.
Came to visit with my daughter because I thought the same thing that happened over there would have to be what I'm going to look forward to when I go home. That's what I'm scared of. The tree over top of my house.
That's what you're worried about?
Yes.
We were looking at TV, looking at the news, just trying to keep an update of what was going on. And the power would go out, then it would come back, it would go out, come back. So about 1:30 this morning, it went out. It came back on somewhere between 3:30. Okay. So I'm glad it came back on.
So the good news there with that last one that you heard from, she has power at this point. She actually said she saw us this morning, came up, wanted to let us know what was going on. You know, I want to show you one more tree down. If we can pan down the, or zoom in down the block here, Jill, you can see this tree that came down. That house is actually vacant. We knocked on the door to see if we could talk to the neighbors, but there's no one living there. You know, most of what we're seeing, though, you can kind of see on the street here, most of it is small limbs. You see one down here on the sidewalk, this kind of stuff that's been blown around. There was a shutter out here earlier. So not majorly widespread in this neighborhood, but obviously that's not very helpful news to the family who lives in this house. Ideally, they're hoping that Pepco will be out here later today, but as we've been hearing, Pepco and the other utilities, for that matter, are going to be dealing with a lot, not only today, but in the coming days. Scott, Sine?
All right, Philip Stewart, thank you so much for that report from St. Pleasant, where they have a lot of cleaning up to do, it looks like.
They sure do, and that's the same report that we're getting from a lot of areas around town.